paint Tillian, this little cutie black dog. The tracing and the reference photo for this painting are in the video's description. Don't forget to grab your PDF supply list at paint333.com. I'm starting by tracing Tillian onto my painting surface. I am painting Tillian on a full-size sheet of 300-pound cold-press watercolor paper. Now, I am painting Tillian very large, but you can trace Tillian onto your painting surface in whatever size you want him to be. And if you want to learn more about how I trace, I have another video that goes over my entire process. Step 1 was tracing Tillian and refining and making sure I had correct drawing around his eyes and nose. Step 2, we are going to mask out some of his gray hair around his eyes and some of his whiskers. I'm using PBO masking fluid and applying it with my palette knife. And all of the supplies that I'm using are listed in the video's description. And you can get your supply list at paint333.com. And that's it for masking. You can clean off your palette knife because we'll be using this again later for scraping. Our masking fluid is dry, so we are going to paint the eyes. I have 3 brushes. They're all about a size 6, and I'm going to be using my silver black velvet for the black color, another size 6 round brush for my quinacridone gold color, and another size 6 for the ultramarine blue. Let's start with the black. I'm just going to paint the darkest areas I see around the eye with my neutral tint color, giving myself outlines that I can kind of fill in with the other colors after this one dries. So I have a heavy mix of neutral tint on my brush. I'm going to go ahead and add in a fourth brush that I'm just going to keep for water. So I have a blotted brush with just water, and I'm just softening these edges here, right below the wispy hair around the eye. This is looking like it's almost already dry, so I'm going to come in with my ultramarine blue and make the rest of the highlight reflection this pretty blue color. I'm going to take my blotted wet brush with just water and make this area wet so that some of that ultramarine bleeds into it, basically creating a watery mix of ultramarine blue for this area of the highlight. And I'm going to use that same brush to kind of soften these edges around the highlight. Now I'm going to take a new brush, another size 6 brush, and put a little opera pink next to the blue where I know I'm eventually going to paint my gold color, because I don't want that to get green. So right now I'm just adding this buffer color of pink around the edges of the eye, so that when I do put my brown in there, it will look nice and bright and not green. All right, this is almost dry. It's still a little bit wet, but that's okay. I'm gonna come in with just my wet brush. This is kind of bleeding more than I would have liked. Right here, that's okay. Okay, so wet brush, touching that opera pink, and getting the whole iris nice and wet. I'm not trying to pick up too much of the neutral tint, but we are getting a little bit of that, and that's okay. And now I can come in with a really heavy mix of quinacridone gold. This is fresh from the tube, so it'll be heavy right away. So I blotted my brush with some water, and then I'm picking up some quinacridone gold. This is nice and wet, so we're gonna have to just kind of dab it in. This area of the iris is darker than this side because our dark side is over here. So our light is coming in this direction. So I have my neutral tint brush. And I have a heavy mix on a blotted brush here, and I'm just gonna see if I can dab some in and let it mix on its own. Taking my blotted brush and facilitating that mix a little bit better. And I'm kind of scrubbing near the edge of the neutral tint where we laid down those outlines to make it look very cohesive and blend that edge into the iris a little bit better. I'm going to dab a little bit more neutral tint, get it the darkness level that I'm looking for. And I'm going to scrub along this edge a little bit too, to soften that shadow into the iris a little bit better as well. But I don't want it to bleed too far down because we want to keep this side nice and bright with the paper showing through here. So I'm even lifting up a little bit of extra pigment right here. And now we'll let this dry completely and we'll come back in and soften some edges after we do the other eye. So let's go ahead and repeat this process with this eye on this side. Heavy mix of neutral tint. And I'm not blotting my brush, but my brush is kind of a blotted level of wetness. Typically when we have a heavy mix of pigment on our brush, it's hard to really over soak it too much. No, I'm not gonna say that. So I just get my heavy mix, and then sometimes if I think I have too much, I can just dab a little off into the back into the palette. And I'm making there's kind of this pretty reflection happening at the very edge of the eye. So I'm just trying to do a nice, really thin line of black right here. And we're gonna keep this part white. Doing the same thing by adding some ultramarine in now, heavy mix. Just kind of wiping my brush on the edge of the palette so I don't have too much. And putting it where that blue reflection is in the eye. I'm adding a little extra water just so it's not too heavy of a mix. And some of that paper can shine through. I have our brush just for water here. Blotting it a little bit and then adding water to this part of the reflection so some of that ultramarine bleeds in there. Not too much. I kind of want this one to be mostly white. Let's give our buffer of opera pink. And then we're coming in with just water all around in the pupil, touching that upper pink buffer area that we made. Now our neutral tint is really having a good time here. Here we go. If you're kind of a little worried about this bleeding that's happening, you can absolutely let your neutral tint and your ultramarine blue dry completely before you move on to the ultra pink, the upper pink and quinacridone gold colors. That's not a problem. And then we're just dabbing this quinacridone gold into the area that we just filled with water. And this eye, since it's on the dark side, will in general just be a little bit darker. I'm gonna go ahead and take some plain water, so this is a pretty wet brush, and try to drop it in that reflection to push some of that pigment away. And sometimes when you do this, you also have to lift pigment out. So I'm doing a little bit of both here. Lifting here, and I'm going to drop in a little bit more plain water that hopefully will push any pigment away that's saying, hey, we want to party in that area. And I might add a little bit water in the same way back into the iris, just so we can have some fun watercolor effects happening. So that looks really great. I'm gonna let that dry too. This isn't completely dry, but we can still work with it. I'm gonna add a little bit of water, rehydrating around this eye. I kind of want that to get that neutral tint went a little too far in here. I'm gonna come back, so I wet this area down, I'm gonna come back and add in some more quinacridone. And I'm kind of focusing on adding it towards the edge, the outside edge of the iris. And it will blend into the inside as we go, since that area is still wet. I'm gonna lift over here, just trying to make sure that this area stays a really pretty highlight. But I really like what's happening when we added that extra water over here. It's really pretty. So I'm gonna add a little bit more here and over here and see what that does as it starts to dry. So as we move on to the next section, the nose, I want you to keep an eye on how your eyes are drying. And if you don't like what is happening, go in with some plain water and lift pigment, or add some plain water, or add pigment in, and play around with it to make sure that you have like a light highlight area being retained and kind of a shadow side on the eye. And that basically in general, nothing's happening that's something you don't want to happen. So I'm gonna move on to the nose, but just keep an eye on the eyes and how they're drying. When I'm looking at this nose, in the original reference photo, it was really dark and it was kind of hard to see the details. So I increased the brightness of the reference photo quite a bit in Canva in order to see these details. So you can feel free to do that as well. I'm working with my same set of brushes because we'll be using similar colors. When we planned out this painting, I decided that I really wanted this nose to have a bright, punchy purple. So that's what we're going to go for with these colors. But we're gonna start in the same way by giving it outlines with our neutral tint. So going in where we see the darkest dark areas in the nose with a heavy mix of neutral tint. And we're going to let this dry completely before we start with the other colors. I'm just coming in with while these eyes are drying and lifting out a little bit more to get that reflection to stand out. Just a blotted brush, and as I lift pigment, I'm depositing it onto my rag. I'm going to add a little bit more opera pink around the pupil area and on the shadow side of the eye. And I'm going for purple, so I'm also going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue in the area I just painted with that pink. Not too much. And we're going to use our blotted wet brush with just water to blend that into the rest of the eye. That looks really good. I like that. This part is still very wet on the eye that I painted on this side. I have opera pink here, coming around the edge of this side, and over here. Just kind of seeing what I think might look nice to make this a little bit more dynamic. A little bit of ultramarine right where I put that pink. Using my wet brush to blend it together. Our eyes and our nose is dry. It's a little wet right here, but we're not going to be touching that area, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to go ahead and go in with a wet brush of just plain water. And I'm going to tint it so you guys can see it with some ultramarine blue. Because I want you to see that I'm trying to leave some space for some reflections that we're not painting with water. And sometimes I like to keep a little bit of space between the water I'm painting and the areas of neutral tint that I already painted. As long as they're dry, they shouldn't bleed too much, but they still could. So if you're a little nervous about that, you can leave a little bit of a white space. And I'm making sure this is nice and wet so that our colors can mix really well together. We're gonna make this whole area a beautiful bright purple. So let's go in, heavy mix of neutral tint, and lay that down. And it should start to kind of bleed into the areas we painted with water, but we can facilitate a little bit of that with our brush as well. Now we have a heavy mix of opera pink, and going in everywhere we put that ultramarine blue. And it should mix together and make a beautiful bright purple. I'm going to I'm lifting out a little bit of water because what I want to do is make the light side of the nose more pink and the dark side of the nose more of a blue. So the whole thing is purple for the most part, but I want to variegate it a little bit as we go here. So I'm lifting a little bit, I'm touching the edge of the neutral tint. I'm going to go in with a little bit of the gold and see if that brightens up this side of the nose even more. I like how that looks a lot. I'm gonna see if I can just lift, add some water, brighten this area up a little bit here around the reflection. So I'm adding water, I'm moving the water around, letting it push the pigment around. And I'm lifting a little bit here around these reflections, kind of softening that edge by lifting a little bit of that pigment off because it's right next to the reflection and I just want that to not be so harsh. And I'm going in and softening the edge of the black a little bit. I'm gonna do this over here as well. Lift a little bit of that extra pigment off so that we can kind of see the nostrils. Oh, there they are, a little bit better. I like to put in water too. It's kind of a balance, a little bit of a dance of adding water and lifting pigment off and just seeing what you like the way it looks. Putting a little water here. Oops, that's a lot. That's a lot of water. That's a lot. There we go. Just lifting. And I'm kind of softening that edge so it's not super harsh just by going around it with my damp brush. Lifting and adding water. And I'm pulling a little bit of this water, this tinted water, over here, just to give the nose a little definition right there. And I think this is all we're going to do. We're going to come in and soften these edges after it's dry. This turned out so pretty. I'm going to add a little bit more gold, kind of keeping it towards the edges and letting it kind of move on its own where it wants to go. That looks good. I'm going to drop in some water so it pushes it back to the edge a little bit, because I just think that looks really good. Drop in some water here and lift it out. And you can really start to see the shape of the nose as you play with the colors and the water in the nose as you go. Drop a little bit more water. It's a lot of water, but it's going to be really pretty. Just letting it move around. I really like this. I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine down here. I kind of was going for a really purple. This turned out to be more of like a magenta, but it's very pretty, so I'm not gonna worry about it too much. Oops, that's not it. Got my wet brush and I'm just mixing that ultramarine I put in there, letting it mix a little bit. And that's it. That's all we have to do right now on the nose. And you can just see how you can tell, you know, the light side is here, and the dark side is over here, and it looks really beautiful with that variegation happening. Sometimes it's hard to walk away, but I want to see if I can add a little bit more pink. That might be pretty, but it might be a lot. Where's my blue brush? That's really pretty, but I want it to have the shape we're going for too. I like this deep purple at the bottom. That's really beautiful, especially because this nose is a black nose. So it's okay to have these highlights happening over here, but it's good to have it be clear that it's, you know, a little bit darker. Looks awesome. Coming back to the eyes, I have my wet brush. Now be careful when you're working up here not to smear the nose. But basically all we're going to do now is soften these edges that are really hard with our wet brush. And this, if you haven't done this before, might be something you want to practice on some scratch paper. But I'm just going in with a wet brush, and as it gets pigment on it, blotting it off and making that edge a little bit softer. Softening this edge up here. And I'm gonna lift a little bit of this ultramarine out, because it's pretty dark. So I have my wet brush, just rehydrating that pigment and then lifting it off and putting it on my blotting towel. And I'm even bringing a little bit of that ultramarine color into that highlight area. And I'm gonna maybe add a little bit more. Oh my gosh, my brush is so hairy. There we go. A little bit more quinacridone. I have to clean that. There we go. Up here, you got a little, I don't know, it lost some of that fresh orange color. So I put a heavy mix in there and I'm just kind of softening it into that area. And I like the way that that looks. And this is the white of the eye, and I really wanted a tiny bit of blue in there. So I'm just putting a really watery mix of ultramarine blue in the top part of that white space. Just to give it a little dimension, make it look like it is just that white space in the eye. Looks really good. So then we'll do the same thing on this side, just soften these edges. And make it look a little less harsh. And I'm going to do something a little bit similar. Lift out a little bit of the ultramarine right here. I really like this area. I'm not going to mess with that at all. I just think it dried in a really pretty way. And then I'm going to actually come in with my neutral tint. Heavy mix on there. And paint over a little area of that ultramarine because it just got to be a lot. And I think it's a little distracting. And even over here, coming in with some neutral tint, covering up a little bit of that ultramarine. So it's not quite so blue, that the whole eye isn't quite so blue. And then any area that maybe lost a little bit of that punchy black color. Just want to make sure the values are right in these eyes. So I am darkening a little bit, adding some neutral tint here. And then we'll come in with our blotted wet brush, just water, and pull it into the iris to make that part of the eye darker. Pulling that just a little bit. Adding a little bit more and moving that around. Especially because this eye again is on the shadow side. So we don't want it to be too bright. The eyes are pretty much done. I don't anticipate that I'll go back in and manipulate those anymore, but I could. Anything's possible. Let's go back to the nose. And we're going to do a similar thing on the nose, which is just softening these edges. Because the reflections are pretty sharp. So this actually looks really good, but I like it to be a little bit softer. So right now we're just lifting. And we're scrubbing pigment to lift it off or move it around how we want it to be moved around. Doing all this with our wet brush. I wanted to lift a little bit over here. Give this a lot of dimension. And I also wanted to lift around this one to give it some dimension as well. And I'm scrubbing to really kind of lift these edges, soften these edges, because they're pretty glued on there. So I'm just scrubbing them a little bit. Right, I'm gonna kind of glaze a layer of opera pink over the top here. And maybe a little glaze of ultramarine blue along the bottom. And just softening that in there a little bit. That looks really good. We'll come back in there. We have another layer or so to do later on, but let's go ahead and move on to the ears. Ears are my absolute favorite thing to paint because they are so fast and so fun. We're gonna go ahead and paint both of them at the same time. And we're gonna start with the 3-step process of laying down water. I'm using my 3/4 inch flat brush and laying down a really big pool of water. Now, as I go, I want you to be able to see this a little bit here. Let's see, a tiny bit. I'm gonna do this one with pink so you can see where I'm putting the water here. Okay, as we go, sometimes I leave little white spaces that just kind of happen naturally. And we are going to make sure we don't go quite all the way to the edge because we're going to be pulling color with our grainer brush. Nice big pool of water. And sometimes these tiny areas like to dry fast, so I'm making sure that I put a lot of water in here. And we're gonna do the same on this ear. I'm gonna tint this one with blue though. So we have our highlight color. I'm hoping we can do cobalt teal as our highlight color. And then our shadow color will be this ultramarine heavy purple. So we are gonna try to keep this right side, dark side ear, purple, and the other one pink. And then when we come in with our highlight color later, we can glaze over it with that cobalt teal highlight color. Again, just making sure there's a lot of water in here. And then the first thing I like to do with ears is if they have black in them, of course this one does, these are black ears, but it's a very short-haired dog. So he's showing a lot of skin through his ears as well. So nice heavy mix of neutral tint. And we're going to go just where we see the darkest darks on the ear. I have my grainer brush. I'm dipping it in water, blotting it. And while this is nice and wet, I am gonna pull some of that paint down here. And pulling it up, there's this nice cute little highlight kind of shape. I don't know, I kind of want to keep that, I think. What I'm gonna do is just put a little bit, blotted brush here, just put a little bit of water right here. That will encourage the neutral tint we already put down to travel up there a little bit. Not crazy, but a little bit. Up to basically the outline that we traced. I'm gonna do that down here. And I'm gonna pulling some color too as we go. Okay. Before we move on to that ear, let's go ahead and add in the highlight color for this ear, which is going to be Opera Pink. And we're going to focus it down here and then let it travel up as it wants to. You don't need a ton. I'm going to maybe add a little bit of water and kind of just say, hey, you guys can move around. You guys can be buddies and mix and be happy. Just don't want the whole thing to be too, like one big highlight. I want it to be a little bit variegated. So I'm just encouraging these colors to go move around a little bit. I really like that. And honestly, that's probably all we need to do. Isn't that crazy? Let's add a little bit more water up here because things are starting to dry. We just want to make sure we give ourselves a lot of time. The more water, the more time you have. Another heavy, heavy mix of neutral tint for this ear. I need a lot. I need a lot. And I'm working around this. This will be funny. Okay. A lot right here. We're gonna go to town right here. Getting some more, bringing it all the way over into that cute little ear shape he's got, and bringing it down. We need more. Oh, this will be pretty. This will be fun. I love putting like little lines. It's really pooling right here, and that's just too much. That's kind of ridiculous. You guys can see that. I'm gonna lift that off because that's too much. So blotting it with a nice blotted brush, lift off some of that extra pigment. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing. Put some water up here and see how the neutral tint's like, oh, we can go up there now. And we kind of want it to do that. We want it to have that pretty little edge up there. You can go up there. You can go up there. I want you to go up there. I'm going to facilitate neutral tint going over here. I love this edge right there. I might not do much more with that, even though there is a little bit. Oh, I splattered. Okay. I just love that little edge. So I'm gonna just get that there. That looks pretty. Okay, let's do the highlight color in this year, which is gonna be purple. So we will start with our Opera Pink. Put it in this highlight area. Heavy mix and kind of having it go towards the bottom and letting it move as it wants to. Then this pretty purple will happen with a nice heavy mix of ultramarine. Ultramarine is kind of a bully, so we probably won't need as much ultramarine as we did pink. Let's see. And let that move around. Let's come in with our grainer brush while those things have a little party. And what do I want to do here? I think I want to add some water. Oops, I didn't intend for that to be, for that to happen. I think that actually looks really pretty though. I'm gonna leave it there. So that was just some quinacridone gold on my brush. I didn't intend for that to happen. This is my opera pink brush. I just want this to be a little bit more purpley, so I'm adding some more of that in. Okay, we're cleaning this brush better. And I just wanted to basically drop some water in to get a little bit more of a highlight happening on this side. But honestly, this is looking really cool. I think that looks really good. I am gonna just blot this a tiny bit. It really pooled up there, and that's gonna take a million years to dry. So I'm gonna just help it out. Maybe a little bit right there, but we don't want to take away too much pigment. Let's see, would any of these benefit from scraping? Sometimes they do. Sometimes just to pull the color, I'm not actually scraping right now, I'm pulling the color around to give it some detail of these hairs. And that can look really cool. Now I'm scraping, so I'm making a little bit of an indent that the neutral tint is going into. Really short-haired puppy dog. And we're gonna have to wait to scrape that one. That one's just so pooled with water, nothing's gonna really happen there, but maybe we can get some hairy details. Just little short ones, because it's a short guy. I'm gonna see. Just lifting a little bit because this is a very dark, really got dark over here. But I think it'll be prettier if I just add some water and see if it pushes it around. I'm even gonna add a little bit more water here and let that push that opera pink. Just see what happens with that. Now I would like to scrape, so I'm just gonna see if there's an opportunity for me to do that. Sometimes you can even scrape the features because ears are pretty, we got a lot going on. Let's wait until this is dry, so almost dry is a great time to scrape. So let's wait a little bit for that. This ear is getting some areas that are almost dry. I'm gonna see if color resist will work a little bit. Just dropping in really saturated, heavy mix of opera pink in some of these areas that look like they're almost dry to see if it'll give me a little bit of texture by pushing the paint around it. And we don't need to do too much. I like that. I like that for that ear, and I think that's ready. Let's see. Can scrape probably to get the color to go darker. That's looking really good. And perhaps color resist would also work over here. I have my opera pink brush that I dipped into my ultramarine just to see what would happen here. And I'm gonna just put a few strategic little areas. I don't want too much because then it kind of loses its impact. But it's also very pretty and then it's hard to stop. And just kind of accentuating some of the features in the ear with this color resist technique. But how pretty is that? How pretty is that when it just pushes the paint away and just, it's like, nope, I'm here now. I love what happened here. I love what's happening here. The subtlety of the scraping. It's absolutely beautiful. So pretty. So that's it for the ears. This little area kind of went to town. So I'm just gonna blend it in to the rest of the ear here. There. That looks better. Next, we're going to do the dark side of his face. I always start with the dark side because then I know I won't overpaint the light side. Because if I end up painting the light side super dark, it's hard to go darker over here and it'll all end up looking like one flat face. So it just works for me to do the dark side first. So I'm painting with water again. And I'm trying to kind of leave areas that have strong highlights without water. And you can see I touched these areas and that's just great because we are going to be coming in with black. So we don't have to worry about those things mixing. And I'm going to leave this white line here where he has that little definition. There's not a lot that we have to do here. So we're going to come in with our neutral tint, heavy mix, and let it hang out and spread all where we put the water. And I'm going to come in with my grainer brush. This is still really wet, but up here, I might have more fun. I just cleaned it off a little bit to help separate some of those bristles. I'm even going to load some neutral tint onto my grainer brush too. And the drier it is, the more you'll see the separation of the spines or the bristles. So I'm blotting it if I need to. And I'm going to go a little bit closer to the eye, drop in a little bit more neutral tint. this up a little bit. And then I'm going to go in with my purple. So what I actually might do is actually mix up a little bit of purple. Since this is such a detailed area, it doesn't have a lot of room to mix on its own. So mixing it in my palette will just give me a little bit of an easier time to put the purple in the detail areas. So I'm kind of putting the purple where I would see lighter areas of black happening. So kind of around the edges. And then coming in with maybe more watery mixes if we need to. I'm actually gonna pull it. So pulling a little bit of it to move over here. Into the light side of the dog. And adding some water, I just want to lighten this area up a little bit and make it more purple. Adding some water here, letting it move over here. Just think that will look kind of neat. And a little bit of grainer brush before it dries. We don't have to go too crazy because it is kind of pretty when you can see the outlines of the brush strokes. I think that looks really nice. So we don't have to have everything have like a really visibly furry edge. I'm just gonna lift up a little bit here. And bring in a little more purple over around the eye. Really like how that looks. Coming in with just a blotted brush to make these edges a little softer, bring them into the white highlight area. Bringing that color a little bit into the highlights with the same blotted brush. It's just giving us some nice soft edges here. Kind of moving into the light side a little bit as we go. That looks really nice. We did mask out a lot of this gray, pretty gray fur. So I don't anticipate we're gonna need much for scraping. And it's still a little too wet to scrape. So what I'm going to do is we're going to paint that black part of his lip with some water, drop in some neutral tint, tapping it, making sure we can release enough neutral tint that we'll be able to work with it. And then coming in with our grainer brush to give it that furry edge. I think we need a little bit more water, a little bit more neutral tint. I'm going to drop a little more neutral tint into the center and then just let it move out on its own. And sometimes I like to, I gotta see where I am here. Oh my gosh, these lines are so cute. He is so cute. Be fun to put just a super light layer of water here so that we're gonna get soft edges when we lay down paint. Really light layer. And I have my grainer brush. And we're gonna just go along those edges of his cheekies, little lips. Give him some dimension there. Light layer of water so this doesn't spread too much. Just gives it a nice soft edge. It looks really good. I'm gonna bring this light layer of water up and in here. Remember now we're on the light side on this side, so we don't need to go too crazy. I'm gonna bring that water all the way up to the nose so that we can use our grainer brush to give it that texture that it's looking for, that we're looking for. And while it's wet, I want to get these dots so I don't lose them. So I'm going to put neutral tint on the dots where his whiskers are. Otherwise I could lose those as I go around with my grainer brush. I'll dab it a little bit, it's a little dark. Bring in that water, that small layer of water down a little bit so this all kind of looks cohesive. And you can see exactly where we put our water, how that paint behaves differently. Isn't that neat? That's so cool. The watercolor, right? It's amazing. And we can do that on this side of the nose as well. Very just light layer of water. So we get those nice soft edges. I'm gonna touch the nose and try to go mostly all the way around. Coming in with my grainer brush, hopefully not too dark, we'll find out. That looks good. And centering the paint in the middle here. This is getting kind of dry, just adding a little bit of water so that we can put in some more texture on that side. Oops, that's a lot. That's a lot of water. That's okay. That's kind of heavy right there. Pick that up a little bit. And then I'm going to take that same wet brush and just bring a little of this color down into the white part of his lip. Just to give it a little softer look. And we'll take care of glazing at the end. Will look really good too, so we're going to add some more color at that time. So what we have left to do still is the light side and the body, and then we're going to finish it off with glazing. And then of course we have to remove our masking fluid and refine those edges, and then we'll be done. All right, we're going to harness the power of visible brushstrokes for the light side of the painting. So it's going to be really fun. And I'm going to use my big brush because I'm working really big. But of course, in general, for this entire painting, if you're working smaller, you're going to probably need smaller brushes. So I'm going to go in and do a little bit of neutral tint directly onto the dry paper. So it's kind of a watery mix of neutral tint. And I kind of want it even a little bit more watery than that. There we go, I like that. And I'm just picking up a little bit, maybe where it just got a little dark. Let's see, he's got like this cute little jaw thing right here. And then it kind of gets dark right around here too. And now, you don't have as much time when you do it this way, but you can try to do a little bit with your grainer brush, but you don't need to do a lot because he's got short hair, and we just kind of want to suggest the furriness. Sometimes we don't need to go so photorealistic with how furry he is. All right, while this is still wet, I'm actually going to do a little bit of glazing, and so I'm hoping to use cobalt teal. So I'm going to make a watery mix of cobalt teal and kind of outline the highlights I see. Again, using kind of this visible brush strokes technique. So I want to leave white space, but I want to go around that white space a little bit with this cobalt teal color. And I'm going to put that over to get up to his nose as well on that side. This is looking awesome. It's looking so cool. It's so fun. How fun is this? And I gotta be careful now because I don't want to paint too much, but I kind of want to soften a little bit of these edges here. Let's glaze. Remember, we're going to try to glaze with a bright purple on the shadow side. And we kind of mixed up some purple. I'm just lifting a little bit of that off. I'm going to glaze a little bit of that teal over here. Looks really good. little bit of teal on the bottom lip here. Soften that here. Okay, and it looks pretty messy right now, but we are going to come back in and do a little bit more grain or brush details and some edge softening. So we'll have a lot of fun with that. So let's go ahead and let this dry. I am going to drop in some water here to see if I can get that paint to kind of go to the edge. So I'm basically intentionally creating a cauliflower here, but I'm also lifting and giving this a little bit more of a highlight. Because especially on the light side of the painting, we don't want to put too much paint. So I'm gonna put a little water in this area as well and let it move around. Let it go to the edges. I think that will actually look really cool too. I'm going to do the same thing, put a little bit of water up here, and just let it cauliflower a little bit. It's really going to town with the cauliflower right away. We must have hit it with good timing. Oh my gosh. This is the best part of watercolor. It's just like, look at that. You can't do that with oil and acrylic. It's so fun. And I'm going to do it up here because I can't help myself. I can't stop. I don't want it to be crazy cauliflowery, so I lifted a little bit out there. Okay, let's let it dry for real this time. Okay, now we're gonna come in with our grainer brush and do some furry details on both the light side and the dark side using neutral tint. So I have my blotted brush and I'm picking up a heavy mix of neutral tint. And I'm just gonna start around the eye area and put these furry details anywhere I see the darkest dark areas of black on the reference photo. I'm going to have my blotted wet brush with plain water handy just to soften edges as I see the need to do so. I don't want my brush to be too heavy with paint or the spines won't separate. So just keep that in mind as you're painting, that you might need to blot it or add a little extra water. It just takes a little getting used to. And I have my bladder brush again, still just softening areas that need to be a little bit softer or a little bit lighter. It's this combination of these really fluffy, furry edges with these softer, blotted away edges that just makes it really pop. And I have to keep telling myself not to make these strokes too long because this dog does have very short hair. So we want it to look like fur, but not long fur. And I want to be careful too to not overdo this lighter side. So now I'm just going to use my wet brush and just try to pick up a little bit of the pigment and create a little bit of a halo kind of with that pigment around these pretty harsh edges, these transitions from dark to light. So wherever I think it would benefit from a little softening. I have my cobalt teal too as part of the highlight color. And I'm just going to make sure that I have that everywhere I really want to draw attention to on the highlight side. So I just have a blotted brush, and we have to remember too that cobalt teal has some opacity to it, so it will cover up even that neutral tint a little bit. I think what I'd like to do is do a little visible brush stroke here. And I just like that. I think that kind of just stood out to me in the reference photo, and I think that looks really cool. And I'm gonna do a purple one, I think, on the dark side. Not too crazy. I like that a lot. That looks really nice. I'm kind of going in, and at this point in the painting, sometimes it's just looking at it and thinking, what would look nice? What does it need? And making sure you're not putting in anything it doesn't need, because that can be very tempting too, to just kind of work it till it's overworked a little bit. I'm gonna load this brush with a heavy mix of purple and kind of do the same thing on the dark side, maybe in any areas that I think would benefit from some purple shadow color. And I like to keep my blotted brush with me while I do this in case any edges need softening as we go. All right, now I think I just need to lift a little bit. There are some areas that got a little dark, and just kind of refining the area around the eyes on both sides. So I'm just lifting if there's something that's too dark. Scrubbing the painting with a blotted brush and cleaning the brush as it gets loaded with pigment. And lifting can just bring a lot of life. Just making things a little softer, bringing back some highlights that you might have lost. Really great tool. And then I'm just going to refine the eyes a little bit with some, I'm thinking it just needs a little bit, a few smoother lines, a little bit more detail. I didn't like that. So hard sometimes when you're working with such tight spaces. I'm just gonna lift that out a little bit. And I'll have to come back in and make that a little sharper once it dries. I'm just putting a little bit of glaze. Sometimes you see things that you want to catch. And I'm just putting a little bit of glaze of teal right there. I think that looks good. Okay, body is always a lot of fun because you can do a lot of more abstract things. So I'm gonna paint with water and I'm starting on the dark side. And he has this little area of white fur here, so we're gonna paint around that. And we're gonna kind of have these be two separate little sections, these shapes right here. And over here a little bit more. Then they can kind of blend together and eventually just drip off the page. So this will be the dark side. Let's go ahead and go in with our purple. I think what I'd like to do is try to just focus the body color as purple and try to leave out too much cobalt teal so that you look at the face a little bit more than the body. We're gonna see how that works. We're gonna focus the color on towards the light. I'm gonna put some along this area. And then come in with neutral tint. And I'm gonna let it flow down the page a little bit, putting extra water down here. And then we have our grainer brush too, because I wanna pull this color up into the chin, keep that in focus. and I want to pull some of it out just to give him that little fluffy edge. Not too crazy, we don't need to go too crazy. This is very kind of abstracted. And then I'm gonna pull a little color into the white fur area. And then I think I want to add a little bit of water along here. All right, my phone ran out of storage, so I had a quick interruption here, but this is getting drier, and I'm just making sure I lift out that little separation. I just think that adds a lot of dimension that I like. And then over on this side, I think what I'm gonna do is paint with water, but just a nice thin layer of water, not crazy. And then a little bit of neutral tint, a really kind of light gray here, just to suggest the shape of the body on this side. And then a little heavier mix with my grainer brush. And I'm gonna come up here, and he has some such cute little hairs kind of coming off his neck right here. So I wanna capture those. And then a little bit of dimension, blotting off a little bit of that color on my grainer brush. And then giving it just a little bit more dimension towards the top. And pulling some color in just to suggest some little cute hair. And then I'm gonna soften this in a little bit too. And bring it up here. He's got a couple really cute little wrinkles that I kind of want to keep in. And I have this brush that still has a little cobalt on it. Let's see if I can make it cute. This is so pretty, what's happening right here. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. All right. I want to bring this in a little bit. It caught a little bit of purple. I think that's really pretty. Especially because I think this patch of white on him is so cute that I kind of want to make sure I distinguish that. And I'm going to soften it a little bit. This is still kind of wet, so it's a little risky. Oh, and it's a little drier right here. So just bringing in some of that color so it's not quite so harsh of a transition. And a little bit more purple for the values. A little bit of purple up here. I think that just adds a lot of cool dimension. I need to bring up this area a little bit better. A little bit of cobalt. I didn't want to use too much of this. But I think I need a little bit. I don't want to mess with this too much because I really like how it's drawing. So we'll see if I can get away without messing with it too much. I like a little bit of that, but not too much of that either. And getting a little carried away. Want to make sure we keep this light. I really like that. That looks really great. I'm going to go in and just refine his face details and start with removing the masking fluid. So I have a masking fluid remover tool, but these can be a little abrasive, so just be careful. Don't rub the masking fluid too hard. I'm still gonna work down here, so I'm leaving these whiskers alone for now and just removing the masking up here on the top. And sometimes I just like to feel, because you'll be able to feel that masking fluid to make sure it's all off the paper. I often miss little bits and pieces of it. You can see those lines are really harsh. So that's why we have to come in and refine it. But before we do, I'm just loving the depth of this ultramarine color. And I kind of want to lean into that a little bit more. Now, this is kind of a scenario where you could start to overwork things. And, you know, even just leaving the ultramarine blue on just right there is beautiful. So you don't have to match, you don't have to have that match both sides. But I just thought, oh, it's so pretty. I kind of want a little bit more on this part of the nose as well. And I'm liking that color so much. I'm gonna glaze a little bit of ultramarine blue on the shadow side of his muzzle. So I just grab a little bit of color, dab it in, clean my brush, and then I can manipulate that color on the paper. And I'm going to balance it out, bring it into just below the nose on this side as well. I really like that. That looks really nice. And I'm gonna also put a little bit, he has that white bottom lip down here, so I'm gonna have a little bit down here just to match. Bring it in a little bit. That looks really good, and I do like, I like having a little bit of extra, the ultramarine blue over there. It's so pretty, but you gotta be careful because sometimes I get into this mess all the time, where I put something down and it's so beautiful that I start to think, well, I should put that in more places. And that's dangerous territory because you start to put it everywhere and all of a sudden it's just not as interesting now because it's everywhere. It's not quite so pretty. It loses a little bit of that impact. So I'm trying to be really strategic on where I'm putting more of that color. Trying to keep it so you can tell it's just highlighting his nose area. And we already removed the masking over here, so I'm trying to work around it a little bit. And a little layer right there is really pretty. That's pretty. That's really pretty. While we're on his muzzle, I am gonna I'm really going it down. I actually like that though. I kind of like these splatters that have been happening, so I'm leaving them alone. But if you don't like anything, you can just pick it up with a Kleenex right away when it happens and you'll be good to go. So I'm just gonna add in some grainer brush detail on the muzzle. And again, we already lifted this masking up here. So just work in a little bit more careful manner. Making that a little dark so you can really tell where his mouth is, just to distinguish his features. I just dipped it into the water to make it a little more defined when I lay down these grainer brush strokes. Having a lot of layers on the muzzle, I think looks really nice. And just making sure it's clear where the features are. All right, while that's drying, we can just come on in and refine these masked out areas. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna blot my brush. It probably has a little bit of black on it still. There we go. And using basically just water here, pulling some color to make these less harsh. Really scraping and scrubbing the edges of them to blend them in with the painting. So just continue this softening work along every hair that we masked out. So this might take a little while. Just pulling color so these are not bright white highlights. They blend into the color of the fur a little bit better. I'm going to test out my size 2 brush with some buff titanium. A nice heavy mix of buff titanium. We're going to see if we can kind of blend in some more opaque hairs around these ones. Just need a little more water. It needs to be the right consistency so it glides. So you need to have a lot of pigment but also a good amount of water so it kind of just glides along the painting. And this color usually dries a little lighter too than when you're painting with it. So it just is helping to blend in some of those masked hairs. And we picked up these ones, I believe, yeah. So I'm gonna just blend in these ones as well. I'm going to go ahead and remove the masking everywhere else since these areas are dry. And then we can just continue to refine everything on the face so we can be finished with this painting. I'm gonna do a little bit of a right underneath this one before I remove the masking. I just think this one is so cute. Sometimes putting a little bit more paint at the bottom and really softening those whiskers in is nice. Pulling a little color along that one, giving it a little bit more dimension. And then doing the same up here, just kind of blending in these whiskers so they're not quite so harsh. Blending in these hairs, I mean. These little hairies. Oh my gosh, he's so cute. And just kind of softening these whiskers a little bit too. Masking is always a little intense, it's a little harsh, and you kind of just have to just make it softer. All right, I'd like to go in with my ink pen and give him some of those cute little black whiskers that he has. Cool thing is, like with this pen, before it dries, you can soften it a little bit, which I really like. At this point, when it's basically done, I like to go zoom out, literally, right? And clean it up. So if I have any random spots of paint that maybe I want to lighten or manipulate, I usually have plenty of cat hair to remove. Pet hair pickups are amazing. They will take care of all that business. And then that will help give me an idea of what's actually on the painting and what isn't on the painting. I'm going to try to erase that without making it too intense. There we go. Sometimes you have to just go in and blot things. Now, ideally, you won't be painting like me with, you know, putting your water cup on the painting and your palette on the painting, because that's usually where I run into trouble. I have some splatters here that are kind of intense, so you can just play around with that. You can see I've already done some unintentional splatter, but we're kind of focusing it on this side and kind of leaving this side clean. And I just think a little bit of black would be really cool. So just focusing it over here. And you don't need too much. But a little bit can be really pretty. And I'm going to cover up these little mistakes I made with splatter. What? You can do that. You can do that. Nobody will know unless you film a YouTube video and put it out for the world to see. I'm gonna see if I like a little bit lighter, more watery splatter over here. Just kind of bring that into the fold a little bit. But I don't want to make this whole side speckled, because it'll be like, what? It'll be too much. It'll be confusing. It'll look like wallpaper. And we already had some splatters happening over here, so I'm just gonna add a few more. And typically it will balance that out too, make it look kind of nice. I really like this. I'm gonna put a tiny little bit of a purpley, watery, purpley black splatter here. Cause that was a little like mistake splatter, and I don't know, that didn't look very pretty. So we're gonna make it look pretty and intentional. And that looks really good. And then you just sign it. Might look good right here. It could look good right here too. I think I'm gonna put it over here. I just really like this interpretation happening over here because we left so much out. Yeah, that looks good. I really do like that. Before we leave this video, is you could, and I'm gonna zoom in, you could lift some texture in the nose, which is something I do really like to do, especially when you're working big. This is harder if you're working small. It's hard to lift little dots, very little dots, because you have to scrub, right? And which means you have to kind of cover a little bit of an area. But lifting to give them a little texture on their nose can look really cool. And you don't need to do very much for it to have an impact. So I'm gonna do a tiny bit just near this reflection on his nose. I went in with some buff titanium, just a kind of watery mix of buff titanium, and made some smaller dots on the nose in the reflective area. And as the pigment got deposited on my painting, I kind of kept going and got lighter and lighter shades of buff titanium. I thought that looked really nice. And I think it looks especially nice when it's combined with lifting. This little dot is lifted. Over here is lifted. I really like that, and that's all I'm going to do with that. The last thing I'm going to do is kind of soften this nose into the background, into his snout a little bit. I might do some opera pink and extend that a little bit. Just the power of glazing to really bring a lot of dimension and interest into your paintings. I love this, but it's a little dark. It's just attracting a lot of attention, so I'm lifting out a little bit more right there. But I like that shape of the brush stroke. I also really like what happened here, that it lifted a little bit of that nose. So I just went in and lifted a little bit more, just because I really like how that ended up looking. And then I'm going to bring in maybe a little bit more pink around this edge here. I think that looks really nice. Opera pink is also a great buffer color between areas of yellow and blue. It's just looking really good. These little details can just take your painting to the next level. I basically, right now, my goal is just to smooth it a little bit. It's done, it's definitely done. But it looks a little, it's just a little bit I don't know what's the word, chunky. And I'm not being too afraid to paint over these masked out areas because it'll just soften them. It shouldn't erase them too much. And the last thing I think it needs, I'm gonna put a little bit of boop pink right by the eye. I like that a lot. I'm gonna see if a little bit more cobalt teal up here might help round out the look on his face a little bit. And I'm really happy with that. Those little details added a lot, and overall the painting is just so bright and so fun, and I love his expression. I'm really happy about it. So I hope you enjoyed painting with me. Thank you for joining along. I hope you had as much fun as I did painting Tillian. Let me know what your favorite part was in the comments. And if you're new to watercolor and interested in animal portraiture, don't miss my Paint 333 watercolor program for beginners. And if you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you in the next video. Happy painting!